March 9th, 2016. A date forever burned into the mind of Ethan Carter. That night started like any other. Late hours at the engineering firm in Charleston. A looming deadline, exhaustion pressing down on his shoulders like a weight he couldn't shake. His wife Samantha was also working late at the news station. They barely exchanged a text that day. At exactly 11:42 p.m. his phone rang. An unknown number. His gut clenched before he even picked up. Some calls, you just know they don't bring good news. The voice on the other end was cold, too precise, too emotionless. Is this Mr. Ethan Carter? He swallowed hard. Yes. I'm sorry to inform you, there's been a fatal accident on Interstate 10 westbound, just outside Savannah. The vehicle was registered to a Samantha Carter. I'm very sorry, sir. The car caught fire on impact. There were no survivors. Ethan's legs gave out. He hit the floor before the phone even slipped from his hand. This couldn't be real. Samantha was supposed to be coming home. She should have been home. But the details kept coming. The flames, the wreckage, nothing left but ashes. At the Savannah Police Department, reality blurred. Everything felt like a nightmare he couldn't wake up from. They showed him 2 small items pulled from the wreckage. Her wedding ring, and the gold necklace he had given her on their first anniversary. That's all they had. No remains, no DNA. Just those. The funeral was held on March 15th. But there was no body. Just a closed casket and the unbearable weight of a life shattered. And worst of all, their daughter, little Emily, just 3 years old, kept sitting by the front door, waiting for her mother to come home. And Ethan, he drowned in his grief. Breathing became a battle, living almost impossible. The days turned into weeks. But for Ethan Carter, time didn't move forward, it just dragged slow and merciless. Every corner of the house still smelled like Samantha. Her favorite lavender candle on the nightstand remained untouched. Her hairbrush sat by the bathroom mirror, strands of her long dark hair tangled between the bristles. And every night, every single night, Emily would walk to the front door, tiny hands gripping the handle, peeking out into the darkness. Daddy, is Mommy coming home today? That question. It broke Ethan in ways no amount of grief counseling could ever repair. He couldn't answer her. How do you explain to a child that her mother isn't coming back, and there's nothing left to even say goodbye to? Margaret Carter, Ethan's mother, stepped in. Strong, steady, the very foundation that held their broken lives together. At 61, she had lived through her own share of heartbreak, raising Ethan alone after his father walked out. But this pain in her son's eyes was something she couldn't mend. You've got to keep going, baby, she whispered to him one night as Emily finally cried herself to sleep. That little girl needs you. Don't let your grief raise her instead of you. But how do you live when every breath tastes like regret? For months, Ethan barely functioned. He moved like a ghost, going through the motions of work, parenting, survival. But none of it felt real. His heart had stopped beating the day he buried an empty casket. And through it all, only one person seemed to pull him back from the edge, Marcus Bennett. Marcus had always been there. At the funeral, standing right by his side. During those endless nights, showing up with whiskey and words that felt like lifelines. But over time, even Marcus began to disappear. One evening, over half-empty glasses, Marcus leaned back and sighed. I'm leaving, man. Got a big opportunity overseas. Europe. Ethan barely reacted. His world was numb, his grief so thick it suffocated any desire to care about the outside world. Marcus promised to keep in touch. But like all empty promises, that too faded. The calls stopped, the texts became less frequent, and just like that, Marcus was gone. And yet something about that goodbye didn't feel right. Not at the time. But years later, that moment would haunt Ethan more than anything. Years passed, but the pain, it never really left. By 2019, Ethan had settled into a robotic existence. Work, take care of Emily, sleep when exhaustion finally dragged him under. Repeat. Friends tried to pull him out of the darkness. They encouraged him to start dating again, to find happiness, to move on. But how do you move on from a love you buried literally? His heart had become a graveyard, every dream he and Samantha built lying cold and lifeless beneath the weight of betrayal he didn't even know existed yet. And then there was Emily. She was growing up fast. At 5 years old, she had her mother's untamed spirit and her father's deep searching eyes. One night, as Ethan tucked her into bed, she turned those big brown eyes toward him and asked the question that shattered what was left of his composure. "Daddy, why don't you smile anymore?" He couldn't breathe, couldn't speak. All he could do was sit by her bedside until her tiny breaths evened out and she fell asleep. And when she did, Ethan sat alone in the dark, his face buried in his hands, wondering how much longer he could keep living like this. Margaret watched all of this in silence. Her son, her brilliant, driven, loving son, had become a ghost trapped in a body still breathing. So she did the only thing a mother could do, she stayed. She made sure Emily had warm meals, birthday parties, Christmas mornings filled with presents, and just enough joy to make the house feel like a home again. But even Margaret couldn't fill the void that Samantha had left behind. Because some ghosts don't haunt places. They haunt people. And for Ethan Carter, Samantha's absence followed him through every sleepless night, every cold morning, every empty chair at the dinner table. Until one day, it didn't. Until the day Ethan Carter walked straight into the arms of a truth more devastating than any grave. It happened on a warm July evening in 2023. Ethan had finally given in to Emily's pleas. She'd spent months asking her little voice full of hope, "Daddy, can we go somewhere? Just us." At first, he dismissed it like every other suggestion for change, but then he saw something in her eyes, something he recognized all too well. Exhaustion. Not the kind that comes from running around the playground or staying up past bedtime. No, this was the weariness of growing up under the heavy cloud of grief. She was only 10 years old, and yet she carried the emotional weight of a lifetime. That realization broke him, and for the first time in years, he decided to do something spontaneous. They packed their bags and flew to Maui, Hawaii. From the moment the plane touched down, the island seemed to embrace them. Warm, fragrant air wrapped around them like a long-forgotten memory. For the first time in what felt like forever, Ethan felt something stir inside his chest. Relief. They checked into the Ocean Breeze Resort, a beautiful stretch of paradise where the ocean met the sky in a perfect endless line. Emily twirled in the sand, her laughter carried on the ocean breeze. "This is the best day ever, Daddy," she shouted, spinning with her arms wide open. And for that brief moment, Ethan smiled. A real smile. The first in years. The first 2 days were blissful. They explored the island, walked along the beach, ate tropical fruits straight from the market. Ethan watched his daughter run along the shore, the sunlight dancing in her hair, and he thought, maybe, just maybe, we can be okay. But the universe has a cruel sense of timing. On the third evening, as the sun dipped low and painted the sky with streaks of fire, everything changed. They sat at a beachfront cafe. Emily was finishing her smoothie, her feet swinging beneath the chair. Ethan leaned back, letting the breeze wash over him, feeling a rare and fragile peace. Until he saw him. A tall figure walking casually along the shoreline. There was something about his walk, confident, almost cocky. Something clicked in Ethan's mind. That couldn't be. But when the man turned his head slightly, the setting sun lit up his face just enough for Ethan to see. Marcus Bennett. His best friend. The man who had vanished without a trace. Ethan's heart slammed against his ribs. His vision tunneled. No, this couldn't be happening. But before he could even rise from his seat, he saw her. Walking beside Marcus. Her long, dark hair flowing over her shoulders. Her skin glowing under the last golden light of the day. And then she laughed. That laugh. The sound that had haunted his dreams and broken him night after night. It wasn't a ghost. It wasn't a memory. It was Samantha. Alive. Smiling. Holding hands with Marcus Bennett. And in that moment, Ethan's world shattered. The air around him turned cold despite the humid Hawaiian evening. Ethan sat frozen, his hands trembling against the wooden table, the glass of water before him shaking as if the earth itself were quaking beneath his feet. How? How was this even possible? For 7 years he had buried himself in grief. 7 years of looking into his daughter's hopeful eyes, knowing her mother would never return. 7 years of blaming fate, God, himself. And here she was. Alive. Laughing. In the arms of the man he once called brother. Ethan stood slowly, his legs barely carrying his weight as he stumbled toward the beach. He kept his distance, his feet sinking into the sand, the world around him a blur of sound and color. They looked so comfortable, so utterly at peace. Marcus leaned down, kissed Samantha gently on the cheek. She threw her head back and laughed again, completely unaware that her past, her sins had just caught up with her. And then she kissed him. Right there under the golden sky, with the ocean crashing behind them, she kissed Marcus like she belonged to him. Ethan felt his vision narrow. A dangerous calm settled over him, colder than any grief he had ever known. He pulled out his phone. His fingers trembled as he found the contact he hadn't called in years. Marcus Bennett. He pressed call. The phone rang twice. Then, "Yo, my guy. Been a minute." That voice. That same easy, smooth confidence Marcus always carried. As if nothing had happened. As if the last 7 years hadn't destroyed Ethan's life. Ethan swallowed the bile rising in his throat. "Yeah, it's been a while. Where you at these days?" A brief pause. Then the lie. "Berlin, bro. Been out here a couple of months now. Work's crazy. You know how it is?" Ethan's knuckles turned white. "Damn, that's far. Figured maybe you were somewhere tropical." Marcus chuckled. "Wish, man. Maybe one day." Ethan's heart pounded. He ended the call. Just like that, Marcus had lied, so effortlessly, so naturally. And now Ethan knew. He knew with absolute certainty this wasn't some chance meeting. This was betrayal. Calculated. Premeditated. He watched them a while longer, the rage inside him burning hotter with each second. He memorized their patterns, their routines. Every morning breakfast at the Ocean Breeze Cafe. Afternoons spent strolling the beach hand in hand like a married couple on honeymoon. They weren't hiding. They weren't even worried about being found. And that's what made Ethan's blood boil. They thought they'd gotten away with it. They believed the past would never come for them. But it had. And it was wearing the face of a broken man with nothing left to lose. By the fourth day, the storm inside Ethan Carter had reached its breaking point. He wasn't grieving anymore. He wasn't drowning in sorrow. No. Now he was something far more dangerous. Calm. Cold. Determined. That afternoon, as tourists flooded the local market, Ethan wandered aimlessly. At least that's how it appeared. But his mind was sharper than ever. Every step had purpose. Every thought was razor-focused. He found what he was looking for in a small, dimly lit shop tucked between rows of overpriced souvenir stalls. A weapon. It didn't take much. Cash changed hands. No questions asked. And just like that, justice, or what he believed was justice, rested cold and heavy in his palm. That night, Ethan sat alone in his hotel room. The gun lay on the table before him. His reflection in the mirror looked back with eyes he barely recognized. There was no fear there. Only silence. And beneath that silence, rage. He replayed every memory. The night they told him Samantha had died. The charred remains that weren't hers. The ring, the necklace, the empty coffin. Emily sitting by the door every night asking for a mother who was never coming back. And Marcus, the man who sat beside him, poured him drinks, promised him it would get better. All the while living the life he had stolen. That night, the decision was made. Ethan would not go home with unanswered questions. They would face him. And they would answer for every single sleepless night, every tear, every shattered dream. As the Hawaiian sun dipped beneath the horizon, casting its final golden glow over the ocean, Ethan stood and tucked the weapon into his jacket. Tonight, it would end. The night air was thick with the scent of salt and impending judgment. Ethan positioned himself near the entrance of the resort spa eyes, scanning the flow of tourists. His heartbeat wasn't racing anymore. In fact, it was disturbingly calm, steady, measured like a man who had already accepted the weight of what was about to happen. Then she appeared. Samantha. Her hair still damp from the spa treatment, skin glowing under the soft resort lights. She looked relaxed, almost ethereal, like a woman who had everything she ever wanted. But when their eyes met just for a second, her entire body froze. Her lips parted in a sharp, silent gasp. Her eyes darted left then right, calculating an escape route. But Ethan stepped forward. He didn't have to say a word. The way his hand slid into his jacket, just enough for the metal glint of the gun to catch her eye, was more than enough. "Don't scream," his voice was a low growl. "Walk." And she obeyed. Inside his hotel suite, the door clicked shut behind them. Samantha stood rigid, her hands trembling at her sides. Ethan didn't speak. He let the silence crush her. Finally, he stepped closer, eyes locked onto hers, the gun never wavering. "I saw your body," he whispered, his voice steady but deadly. Her lips trembled. She tried to find words, but nothing came. "No lies." Ethan continued, his voice cutting through the tension like a blade. "No stories. You're alive. You've been alive all this time. So, how?" For a moment, she didn't answer. But then, like a dam breaking, the truth came pouring out. She told him everything. The plan. The staged accident. The body from the morgue. The jewelry planted perfectly to seal the illusion. Ethan's chest tightened as every painful memory slammed back into him. He had mourned ashes that didn't even belong to his wife. He had buried a stranger. Why, his voice broke slightly, but his grip on the gun didn't falter. Tears welled in her eyes, her voice barely a whisper. "Because I was tired, Ethan. Tired of being a wife. Tired of being a mother. Tired of that life." Ethan felt the floor tilt beneath him. "And teen Marcus." She hesitated. That hesitation told him everything. I started seeing him before the accident." A sharp, bitter laugh escaped Ethan's throat. "Of course you did." He took another step forward. "You let me mourn you for 7 years. You let our daughter grow up without a mother. Do you even care?" Silent tears streamed down Samantha's cheeks. But Ethan had no more room for pity. "Call him." Ethan ordered, his voice low and dangerous. "Tell him to come here." Her eyes widened in panic. "Now." Her hands shook violently as she dialed. The line rang once. Then Marcus's voice, casual as ever. "Yo, baby, what's up?" Samantha swallowed hard. "Come to room 207. Now." There was a pause. "Damn, that's serious. I'm on my way." The line went dead. 5 agonizing minutes later, there was a knock at the door. Ethan shifted to the side, his gun ready. Samantha, pale as a ghost, opened the door. Marcus Bennett strolled in like he owned the place. But when his eyes landed on Ethan, everything stopped. For a moment, time stood completely still. Marcus's eyes darted from Ethan's face to the gun, then to Samantha's pale, tear-streaked cheeks. And just like that, the mask of arrogance slipped. The charming, untouchable man that had once been Ethan's closest friend now looked cornered. But even in that moment, Marcus couldn't help himself. He forced a smirk, that same cocky grin he'd used to talk his way out of every bad situation since they were kids. "Well, damn, Ethan." Marcus drawled, his voice low and almost amused. "Guess this is a hell of a reunion, huh?" Ethan stepped forward, the gun unwavering. How long? Ethan's voice was deadly calm. Marcus shrugged, trying to play it cool, his hands lifted slightly in mock surrender. "You already know, man. What's the point in—" "How long?" Ethan's voice dropped lower, colder. Marcus hesitated, then sighed. 8 months before the accident. Ethan swallowed hard. 8 months. That meant every night he'd kissed his wife goodnight, every family dinner, every whispered promise before bed. It had all been a lie. A sick, calculated, methodical lie. Marcus leaned back against the wall, his cocky facade slipping further. "People change, man," Marcus muttered. "Life moves on. Ain't no point crying over spilled milk." Ethan's hands trembled, but not from fear. From rage. 7 years of hell. 7 years of watching his daughter wait by the door. 7 years of believing he had failed his family. And here stood the man responsible, casually brushing it all aside. "You destroyed my life," Ethan whispered, his voice raw and ragged. "And you left my daughter to grow up thinking her mother was dead." For the first time, Marcus looked away. But it was too late for remorse. Too late for anything. Ethan's fingers slid over the trigger. Marcus saw it, and for the first time, fear cracked through his smooth exterior. "Wait, man, hold on." But the first shot rang out before the sentence even finished. The sound echoed through the hotel room like thunder. Marcus staggered back, his eyes wide in shock as blood bloomed across his crisp white shirt. He gasped, his body crumbling to the floor. Ethan stood over him, his breathing heavy eyes locked on the man who had destroyed his world. A second shot followed, final, unforgiving. Samantha screamed, her hands flying to her mouth as she stumbled back against the wall. Ethan turned toward her, his expression cold, empty, and utterly broken. Slow, measured steps closed the distance between them. "You let me mourn you," he said quietly. "You let our daughter grow up motherless, and you just lived." Samantha's sobs filled the room. Her knees buckled, her hands clasped together as if begging for salvation. But Ethan, he was long past mercy. He raised the gun once more. Her eyes locked onto his, wide with terror, but deep down she knew. This was always how it was going to end. A single shot. Then silence. The echoes of the final gunshot seemed to linger in the air long after the sound had died. Ethan stood motionless, the gun slipping from his fingers and clattering against the polished marble floor. It was over. The betrayal, the lies, the years of suffocating grief, they had all led to this moment. But there was no victory. No relief. Only a heavy, unbearable silence. He looked down at the wreckage of the life he once knew. Blood soaked into the expensive hotel carpet. 2 bodies lay still, one he had loved more than life itself, the other he had once called family. Justice. No. This wasn't justice. It was retribution. A final bloody exclamation point at the end of a chapter that should have ended long ago. Ethan moved toward the hotel phone, his fingers trembling as he dialed. The voice on the other end was crisp and professional. "Emergency services. What's your location?" His voice was hollow, drained of all life. "Haile Kai Resort. Room 207. 2 dead." A long pause. "Sir, what happened?" Ethan closed his eyes, a single word falling from his lips. "Justice." And then he hung up. By the time the police arrived, lights flashing red and blue across the white walls of the luxurious resort, Ethan was sitting calmly on the edge of the bed. His hands were folded neatly in his lap. He didn't resist. He didn't run. He had nowhere left to go. As the cold steel of handcuffs snapped around his wrists, Ethan's eyes drifted to the window. Across the courtyard in a neighboring suite, he saw the soft silhouette of his daughter Emily fast asleep. She had no idea. No idea that the man who had just been led away in chains was her father. No idea that everything was about to change. Forever. The trial was swift, but the courtroom was packed every single day. Reporters, curious onlookers, family members, all desperate to witness the final unraveling of a tragedy too surreal to believe. Ethan Carter didn't fight the charges. He didn't beg for mercy or offer tearful excuses. He pled guilty to both murders. The defense painted him as a man broken beyond repair. A man crushed under the unbearable weight of betrayal and grief, psychologically shattered by a deception so cruel it bordered on inhuman. But the prosecution stood firm. They reminded the jury that no matter how devastating the betrayal, Ethan had made a choice. He had tracked them. He had purchased a weapon. He had pulled the trigger. Twice. And for that, there had to be consequences. On December 14, 2023, Ethan Carter stood before the judge one final time. The courtroom was silent. Not a cough, not a murmur. Even the air felt heavy, thick with the weight of what was about to be said. The judge's voice echoed through the chamber. Mr. Carter, while the deception against you was undeniably cruel, you acted with clear intent. You planned. You executed. This is not justice. This is vengeance. And for that, the court has no choice but to sentence you to 35 years to life in prison. A single heart-wrenching sob broke the silence. Margaret Carter, Ethan's mother, collapsed into tears. She had already raised her son alone once. Now she would raise her granddaughter the same way. At the front row, little Emily sat next to her grandmother. Her small fingers clutched Margaret's trembling hand, her eyes wide, confused, and filled with a sadness far too deep for a child her age. She didn't fully understand what was happening. She only knew her father wasn't coming home. And just like Ethan had once grown up fatherless, so would she. As the transport van pulled away from the courthouse, Ethan sat in silence, his face pressed against the cold metal bars of the window. No tears. No anger. Just a quiet resignation. Because in the end, the greatest betrayal was his own. He had sworn to be better. He had promised himself that Emily would never feel the kind of abandonment he had endured. And yet, in one violent, irreversible act, he had become the very thing he hated most. Some betrayals leave scars. Some leave graves. And some leave a man wondering if justice was ever truly served. Ethan Carter's story isn't one of simple right or wrong. It's a story about the devastating cost of betrayal and the irreversible consequences of taking justice into your own hands. Today, behind cold prison walls, Ethan spends his days in silence. The echoes of his past, of what was lost, of what can never be undone, haunt every moment. But the question remains: was he a monster? Or just a man, pushed too far? And what about Emily? Will she ever know the full truth of what her mother did? Or will she be spared that burden, allowed to remember only fragments of a woman long gone? We'll leave that for you to decide. Because in the end, some truths are heavier than the lies that hide them. And some stories are never truly over.